Oh, I see it now.
See it?
Yep.
All right. So to get into the problem-oriented policing, that's basically our community-oriented policing. You know, things that we do, the stuff we have to do in the community, and work with community members to make things happen. You're talking about, you know, crime in a certain area, neighborhood problems. So everything that we do, and sometimes we have to change our tactics. Some tactics don't work. We go with another one. Drug activity. There's ever changing things in the drug world. They're trying to create new ways to, like the Molly that's out there now. They use different chemicals to do the Molly, and some of them aren't classified in the MDMA, and they don't qualify for an offense. So we have a local ordinance that we can charge somebody under. The problem with that being is the charge isn't as high as what it would be if it was a cocaine or heroin or another type of narcotic. So we have to change our tactics, and that's one things that we do in the department. We have to figure out and work with different avenues of our department to figure out what's going to work the best for everybody.
So I guess specifically, like the first bullet on the this outline that Nate sent about the broken windows and the stop and frisk. Can you tell us a little bit about how we currently, what we employ, I guess, when we're have suspicions or?
So I'll get in broken windows. Everybody's not familiar with that. That's really a theory or concept that started in New York City and really relates to if you allow your neighborhoods to become in disrepair, it tends to attract criminal activity. So you have abandoned houses and they, in theory, have broken windows, broken doors. You know, it then becomes a hot spot for criminal activity because nobody's paying attention, nobody's caring for it. The concept has merit, you know, and I think we do in part still employ that theory through our code enforcement. You know, you want people to be proud. Look at the revitalization of neighborhoods like Orchard Street, Westlake Ave, and it tends to drive out the criminal element because people have pride, they're reporting and they're assisting. And basically that's really what it comes back down to is we, especially now, it's not more any more true than it has been in the past, but with our limited resources, we need the public's cooperation, the public's help. We need them to be part of the solution and part of the team. So we, you know, it's a team concept, and we need people to report things when things happen and to be part of the solution to the problems through community watch and different things like that. So it's very important. Stop and frisk, that's really not something that we have ever really deployed or used in Auburn. That's more of a larger metropolitan New York City where that's how they deterred crime. Is, you know, you stop 10 people, chances are, you know, the theory is you're going to get 1 or 2 guns off the street or come across somebody that's got a warrant. And we really weren't, we didn't have the need to be aggressive like that. We do have hotspot policing, and like Lieutenant Slayton was saying, if we see an uptick in crime in a certain area, we can transfer our resources, limited as they are. But for instance, we'll put it in context to Auburn, New York. We have a rash of car break-ins in a certain area, the east side, happened this past summer. So our supervisors, our shift commanders have the ability to shift their manpower that they have to that area. And you have hotspot reactivity. You can put all your resources, all your eggs in one basket in an attempt to try and catch, you know, the individual that's perpetrating those crimes, because they tend to be in areas within our city, and we can be reactive in that capacity and deploy unmarked vehicles, officers in plain clothes to try and see if we can curtail that criminal activity. So on a scale of Auburn, New York, that's how we address those types of issues. Jim, you
Some
want
of
to
the,
add?
yeah, some of the problem with like the stop and frisk, people think that is if we have an incident in the middle of the night and we get a description of somebody, say we have a larceny at like a burned dairy and we get a description of a male wearing a red jacket walking down the street and we stop that person, that really doesn't fall under the stop and frisk. We have a description of somebody that committed a crime that we're looking for. But that's where the confusion comes in with people a lot of times is, well, I was just stopped for nothing. No, we had information that something happened in an area and you matched the description. And if the person
We're just
happens not to be,
we're not randomly stopping somebody or some person. You know, could we do a better job? And that's part of you know, the customer service per se is we do a better job informing or making sure that the individuals that we stop and talk to know why we're doing that. Absolutely, that's always something that, you know, becoming aware and making sure that we follow through with those things.
we've also worked with codes recently with a house in a neighborhood that kept having issues in drug activity. So between City Hall and codes and everybody, they deemed that house disorderly and put a notice of on that house saying you have a time frame to clean up your act. So it's a collaboration with a bunch of different people. It's not just the police going into the neighborhood.
Quality of life issues are something on a smaller scale in a city like the size of Auburn that are very important to us, and that's how we identify criminal element and try to drive those things out. Unfortunately, in Auburn, it's 8 square miles, not very big. You take the problem from Delavan Street, it's going to go to Barber Street, it's going to go to Washington Street. It's really not, you know, we're going to keep dealing. We are, but the neighborhood itself may see relief, which is okay. But we as the police or the other services are going to keep dealing with that criminal element until, you know, we are able to sustain an arrest or some other avenue of relief for the public.
Is there any other questions or comments about either one of those topics?
Yes, you mentioned the stop and frisk. Is any of that kind of language in the policies? And maybe if it is, another way to word that or change it?
So we don't utilize stop and frisk. It's just, it's not, you know, we don't have any specific policies that state that. We do, you know, according to case law and constitutional law, we may at times, and we do, this is outlined in our policies, specifically the guidelines of when we want to stop somebody on the street. You know, having a suspicion, if we want to ask them questions or ask them the ability to conduct a search of their person, we can't just merely do it. We can stop somebody and try to engage them in conversation, but our policies state that if we don't have anything more than suspicion, that's where it ends, and they can refuse to cooperate with us. They can walk away. Those types of things are in our policy, but stop and frisk per se is not something, that's not a tactic or a policy that we really deploy on a daily basis.
Oh, okay.
So our next topic, you know, which is, I guess, an interesting topic. You know, we've learned a lot about bias and racial injustice in our community in the past year. There's been a lot of work and focus around looking inward at ourselves and trying to be better and do better things in our community and more justified things. So we want to talk about discriminatory stops or, you know, bias-based stops, searches and arrests. So if you guys can talk to us about that.
Well, you know, it's, I'll call it what it is. And oftentimes you'll hear it driving while black. I'm sure everybody's heard that term before. And I am confident as the chief of police that it doesn't happen here. I am absolutely confident that the officers that we have employed within our agency, the training that the expectation and the accountability, that does not happen here. Have we got those complaints? Absolutely. I've sat in with some of those complaints before, but explaining the context once I have the ability to investigate the stop and how it happened. I think we've cut out, and I'll bring up a particular incident. It's one of the first times I met Bob Ellison, who is the chair of our City of Auburn Human Rights Commission, and one of his kids was stopped by an officer late at night, and it was in the parking lot of Seward Elementary. After hours, it was dark out, and looking into the context of that stop, I was confident that it wasn't a pretextual stop because the driver was black, and it was an officer really doing his job, saw a suspicious vehicle and investigated. Once we gave Bob all the background information about why the stop occurred, I think he was satisfied about that. But you know what? The good thing about that is it created a relationship with Bob and I and the deputy chief, where we sat with him, we explained to him, and I think we satisfied his concern that that might have been the reason why. We always will engage anybody that has a fear or a question, a concern about a stop, about any incident. That's one good thing about that community relation is we are open, we're honest, we try to be as transparent as possible, and I think it goes a long way. But in regards to that, I really truly believe in my heart that we don't have officers that are doing that. And if we did and we were able to show and prove it, we would hold them accountable, because that is not something that's tolerated in this police department. And that goes for, that's not traffic stops, this is in general. That's, any type of bias towards race, ethnicity, gender, that is not something that's tolerated in this police department. And, it's all about accountability. It's all about making sure that expectation, that policy, that procedure is known, and you hold accountability, you hold those officers accountable. But, I'm confident in the quality of our officers, that we don't have any of those hidden biases. Not to say that we don't keep up on training and making sure that that is a paramount understanding across the board. You always have to train. We all have those implicit biases, absolutely. But to overtly police against a certain gender or race or ethnicity in our community, absolutely not tolerable. Jim, you want to add to that?
Yeah, we just have to have an articulated reason for the stop. We can't just stop a vehicle because I don't like blue cars that are driving on the street today. But there's a vehicle and traffic law book that has a lot of different reasons for the stop in the book that people don't know of. Things hanging from your rearview mirror, license plate covers. There's a lot of different reasons an officer can stop a vehicle without the driver knowing what they did wrong. And that goes back to what I talked about last time. I said, when we were talking about the right to know who the officer is, one of the first things that most of our officers ask is, do you know why I stopped you? And you'll get a number of people that will say, no, I don't have a clue. Well, you have this wrong with your vehicle. You have a tail light out. Well, I didn't know that. So they kind of go hand in hand, the right to know, telling the officer telling the person who they are and why they were stopped.
And Jim, if I can just add to that, as I understand it, the right to know also, the theory of right to know also touches on the stop and frisk issue too, and that ideally in areas, as the chief said, more urban areas where street stops are more common than they are here. The idea of right to know policing is that the police officer would identify themselves first of all, but also if there was a cause for a stop, a reason, an articulable reason to stop a citizen from going about their daily life and detain them, however briefly, that police officer would articulate to the person whom they're stopping, I'm, police officer Smith, here's why I'm stopping you. Do you or Chief Butler have any thoughts on how that might work in Auburn? Again, with the kind of the caveat that it's not something that is, as I understand it, part of routine policing within Auburn, but just articulating the reason for a stop and a brief seizure of a person.
Yeah, Nate, I think if one of the things, and we've already, like Lieutenant Slayton had said, some of the things that we're already starting to implement are coming out of this. And I'd like to bring that forward, possibly to our community forum. The right to know. I don't know if there's a need to be as aggressive as New York City or maybe Syracuse, where they have more deep-seated issues, but I think there's some change, or there's some additions to how we do business that we could bring forward and be a quality result of this whole session that we're going through right now. I think, and again, I'll use Lori and Stephanie. It comes down to customer service and making sure that the individuals we interact with, we're doing at the highest level of professionalism as we can. So if that's, creating or adding to our policies to make sure that those individuals we have an interaction with, know our names or know, exactly why they're being stopped. I think it adds to that, again, that transparency, that trust. And I think it's something that we can do as an agency to make us that much more professional. So I'd like, as your write-ups, I see that as a possible outcome going forward into our plan.
Okay.
Just to add a little bit to that, all of our officers wear name tags. Their names are on their shirts. And in the wintertime when they have their jacket on, their names are on their jacket. So we've never tried to hide an officer's name. So it's always out there. It's as easy to say, like I said in the other committee meeting we had, is you're just adding to, do you know why I stopped you, to the beginning? Hey, my name's Officer Slayton. I'm out doing a DWI road patrol tonight. This is why I'm stopping you. Same thing with stopping someone on the street. Hey, we had a larceny somewhere. We had a robbery. We had something going on. And you might not even be a suspect at this time. The person might just be walking down the street. Hey, did you see anybody around here? Did you see anybody running in any direction? Any information that you can give us will help us maybe find the person that did this. So it all goes with that customer service and about that approach.
And to add to that, just for you as members of the public, we also have an investigative side to sometimes stopping somebody. So if we're stopping somebody because they match a description, a robbery was just occurred, coming right out and telling them exactly why may not be in our best interest, because we're trying to find the perpetrator, trying to get an admission out of somebody. So there's investigative and contextual issues that might not really allow us to put that right out there in the beginning. So just to keep that in mind. But if we're stopping somebody that we think might have been a witness, sure, absolutely. How to best interact with that person, tell them why we're approaching them. But if we think they're a suspect, there might be a different approach to how we're going to do that.
And the Fourth Amendment law and case law in New York, requires that, after all is said and done from a prosecutorial standpoint, that the people be able to prove that a police officer had a certain state of mind when they were stopping someone, and that there's certain levels of a stop, and there are certain escalating things that a police officer must have in their mind when they effect that stop. I imagine a lot of that is, my guess is a lot of your training with your officers is, about that. But it's kind of, it is a back end evidentiary thing by the time it comes to court. But again, my guess is that the Auburn Police Department makes sure that their officers know that, that the mere act of stopping an individual and detaining them however briefly, it has constitutional implications, and that my guess is, Chief and Jim, that you train your people fairly extensively on that piece.
So let me guess here, Nate. Let's see if my mind serves me correctly. Cary versus Ohio.
That's a big one, and DeBoer is the New
And
York
DeBoer.
case. Yeah.
So 25 years later, I still remember the case law. So yeah, I mean, it is imprinted in us and on us. Just so you guys know, and that is something it's driven over and over every year in our training and whatnot, and that those case law cases that we just spoke about, that's the stop and frisk. That's what gives us the ability to do that, but it's taking it that much further and adding the professionalism to it, and really what we're drilling down to, making that a more personable stop when we can, and we interact with the public.
And that's, that Chief, that's, interesting, the juxtaposition between the customer service aspect of it, how to best relate to the community, and the job that police officers are asked to do. You're absolutely right that there's nothing in the Constitution or the Fourth Amendment case law in New York State that requires police officers identify to the person that they're stopping the reason for their stop, right? But that is what right to know policing, as I understand it, asks an officer to do. And so there's I think what we've discussed in these meetings is sometimes on the fine line of what can a police department do to do its job, and also be as community friendly as possible. And so I think that maybe we can put a pin in this and push the aspects of right to know policing out to the larger community group when we discuss this. And if there's any other questions, Aileen, do you have any other input on this, or should we keep it moving?
Well, the only input I have is, I guess, just as a citizen, I guess I get a little nervous when I hear the chief say, it doesn't happen here. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen here. That doesn't mean that if somebody was driving while black, that they don't feel like it did happen to them, even if there was legitimate reason in the end why they were stopped. So I guess I caution against that, because my sons are white. If I had black sons, I would be very concerned about this moving forward. In that, the idea, I know that you're doing the best you can to train, but of course, as we learned from last meeting, sometimes it doesn't hit all ranks, and sometimes we miss things. And I know you're doing the best you can for the department. But I just want to caution that, because we've heard from both of you and Jim, and we were hearing from Nate, who's the attorney for the city. I mean, so I want to caution against, let's make sure that I know you're opening yourselves up to that conversation a lot in the past year, and we will with this public forum, but I guess I caution against saying it doesn't happen here.
Well, and I want to counter with that. And like I said, if it does happen, there's accountability, and that's what I want to push. That we're not condoning, or will never condone. My administration will not condone that type of behavior. So yes, I am not naive to the fact that there are some deep-seated issues within people. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we have done in my administration is changed our hiring practices, and that's where I think you really dig deep into making sure you don't hire those types of people. We hire for character. We hire for integrity. We have the highest standards in background investigations with polygraphs, psychologicals, and that's those things we didn't do to that degree before. And I think making sure that, hey, I'm still seven vacancies deep, but I'm not gonna push those standards aside just to fill spots with people. I want the best people to police this community, and I think that's how we keep those types of things from seeping in and polluting great police force that we have right now. So absolutely not naive to the fact that it could happen, but we also have to have the accountability, and that's where I'm firm on that.
Great.
This is Mayor Jim Basile. I guess to her point is be careful using that statement because some other folks could take it this maybe the way she interpreted it. It could happen. So with that, the other question I had, and I understand you guys are in a very difficult position right now. Is there any, when you mentioned about traffic stops and, something from your mirror or something covering your license plate, and is there any matrix that's kept when officers report a stop that could be reviewed administratively to say that Officer XYZ, boy, you did a lot of stops using this excuse and I don't want to say excuse, but say it's a license plate cover. Is there something going on there, or people tend to have habits of, habitual habits of picking something like that, maybe to it could be an underlying issue that's following that. I'm not sure I'm making any sense there, but
Well, those are called pretextual stops, and you're stopping for a reason to really dig in for another reason. We have to have a reason to stop somebody. So, but we also have the ability to make a stop, like for a license plate cover. But we also have a suspicion that this person is involved in narcotics trade. So that's a reason to stop the individual and start that conversation or try to get into that vehicle and do a search. In regards to data tracking like that, no, we can track if a citation is issued. Absolutely. We do use a computerized citation system called Trax. But Mayor, in regards to that specifically, no, we do not. If we let somebody go with a warning, other than the license plate registration of the car we stopped, we're not tracking much more information than that. So no, to answer your question, quite frankly, we don't have that ability at this time.
all right, thank you. Just curious.
So that covers also the pretextual stops that we have on our agenda too. So I'm happy to have hit that along with this topic. The next part is about use of force, chokeholds. Let's see, what else was there? Yeah, so basically just use of force. And if you could talk about your policies in the city departments, and we don't have anyone from the county on today, right? I'm not missing anybody else? No. Okay. For just the city then, yeah, talk to us about those policies and how your department responds, or how they avoid using that, or how that works.
Well, just to go over some of the layers of use of force, it's we have a system in place when an officer uses force that particular force is documented, and then that documentation is seen by 4 other people prior to it being totally signed off on. So with our use of force, after the officer uses a type of force, it goes to the sergeant, which then goes to the shift commander, which is a lieutenant or a captain. And after it's reviewed by them, it goes to the deputy chief for his signature, and then it goes to the chief of police. So we have quite a few layers involved in our use of force system. And just understand, use of force can be as simple as somebody saying, no, I'm not going with you. And the officer has to reach out after they tell them they're under arrest, to place their hands behind their back without the individual complying right away. We document that. That to us that's the use of force in our use of force policy. So
Anything greater than the normal placing of handcuffs on a wrist is a use of force that we have to document. So if I have to forcefully bring your arms behind your back because you refuse to, even if there's no injury, there's just slight resistance, we're documenting that every single time. So
How often does
we-
that take place?
What's that?
How often is that happening?
So
Oh,
right
Go
now I can talk to, yeah, I'm sorry, Chief. Right now we have 109 use of force incidents out of 20 some thousand calls. So to give you a level, we're typically above or below that, not by much, depending on years. So we just started tracking more of it. Started tracking what types of calls they were, if they were mental health, the types of arrests they were, to try to get that data from that. Before we used to just track the use of force incident.
and also, correct me if I'm wrong, Lieutenant, you were also tracking if there was narcotics or alcohol involvement as well, if they're under the influence.
No, we don't have that capability at this time.
Not yet, because and that's something we were looking at, and I'm sorry, that might have been a conversation we were having. Like oftentimes that is, an interpretation by the arresting officer if they're, intoxicated or under the influence. But we want to really drill down into the levels of force and see if there's any correlation. Mental health, obviously, those are a big concern of ours. Intoxication levels, those are a big concern of ours. And to add to Mayor Basile, this type of call or documentation is really something that we really have a lot of levels of. We are tracking race in regards to these, gender. We want to make sure that we have a full picture of our use of the force to not only institute more training where necessary, but also early warning, early tracking of any specific officers that tend to use force more than others, seem to be involved in those types of incidents more than others, not utilizing such things as de-escalation where it may be appropriate. So yeah, very important. The state as well is, Lieutenant, if you can get into state tracking as well, they have requirements, newer requirements in the last couple of years whereby we got to report certain use of the force to them as well.
Yeah, so starting this month, it goes back to the 1st of November, we have to track, which we did a year ago. They just instituted a new system that I just started this week that tracks the officer's age, the officer's race, what type of force was used, and then the subject's race and age on that. And the type of forces go from if you brandish your weapon, you point your weapon at somebody, you discharge your weapon, you point OC spray at somebody, you discharge OC spray, your chemical weapon, which is our taser, if you point that at a subject, because that alone, even just pointing it at somebody, is a use of force incident in our policy. So we track all that. We've been tracking that for over a year now with the state, but they just came out with a new system this week that implemented into our e-justice system that we started tracking. So now they're keeping records of everybody's age and stuff like that and race.
And our stats internally go back really in depthly. We've added to them over the years, but since 2012, correct, Lieutenant? And
Yes.
we really hit on those as a matter of public education to the presentation we did to the Social Justice Task Force not too long ago. That is available on our website. But that's something in regard to transparency, figuring out a way to put that out for public consumption is, maybe Nate, maybe a bullet point as well going forward. Use of force statistics might be something we can, put out there for the public viewing, just like our policies. Real quick, Aileen, Nate, I'm going to jump off. I'm a floater, so I'm going in between the different groups. So have at it with the lieutenant, and thank you everybody for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief,
Hey, Lieutenant, quick question. Who looks at that? You said you're tracking the info. Who's looking at it? How often are they looking at it? How is that evaluated, I guess, with different officers?
I keep track of that here in my office. That's why I've added to it this year with the mental health, and I've added the city manager had asked at one point, do we track what type of arrest the person was on that the force was used. And if there was no crime, I mean, we can point our weapons at somebody and there was no crime committed, we still document that. We still document that's a use of force in our policy. So I track it here. If we see a pattern of some sort, like with a specific officer or something, we will talk to that officer. We haven't had to do that. There's been no specific patterns. So then, and I share that with the chief and the deputy chief. So they all have access to it.
Nate, do you have, do we want to bottle up any of the remaining bullets underneath the first bullet there? Like, I mean, I have questions about all this stuff, but.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, Aileen, the ones that kind of jump off the page to me are, I think, more, you know, I think of them in more of a national perspective. And I absolutely take your point that we should be very cautious in saying this is a national thing and not something that happens here in Auburn and Cuyahoga County. So even though I guess I think of things like no-knock warrants, right? Breonna Taylor obviously brought that to the forefront. You know, there is a move in Albany to amend the criminal procedure law to do away with no-knock warrants. You know, so maybe if we can touch on that. Facial recognition technology is another big thing that, again, you think of as a Facebook, internet, you know, nationwide thing. But Jim, those are the two things that, if you could touch on those for me, I think we can bottle up this particular subheading, and anything else, obviously, that anyone else would like to add.
And the no-knocks were used, I mean, they were used with the drug investigations and stuff like that. If they're going to do a search warrant on a drug house and doesn't give the person the opportunity to flush the drugs down the toilet, hide them somewhere when the police are announcing before they come in. So that's where that comes into play. And I see you have the SWAT team bullet in with that. A lot of times we'll use those. The ER, we call it, it's our ERT team. Ours is an emergency response team instead of a SWAT team. They do the same functions, but they're just not called the same. And they will utilize them on high risk search warrants and stuff like that.
What about facial recognition technology? Is there anything, we probably don't have that here, and
Right now, the only facial recognition that we have here is when I get my temperature taken every day. We don't have any facial recognition technology at APD.
But that we have that in City Hall. I'm guessing it's fairly similar. And the technology is absolutely here, and that, you know, I even with a mask on, I step up to an iPad, it takes my temperature, and it knows who I am. So the idea behind facial recognition, I guess the controversy behind it is the data that gets pulled out from our everyday lives and activities. How much access to that should law enforcement have? And you know, I think it's probably safe to say that we're just not, you know, to put it in blunt terms, we don't have the resources to be particularly sophisticated about that, even if we wanted to be. So it's just not something that's really, you know, present in our daily lives as in the police department. Is that safe to say, Jim?
Correctly. The financing and the resources to do something like that. Your bigger cities, the New York cities and the Washington areas and stuff like that, they have dozens of people assigned to that stuff, to watch monitors, to see different things. We do not have that.
So those are all a list of, you know, again, I pulled this from the executive order and guidance from executive chambers. These were all, you know, examples of how policing used to go, largely, I think it's safe to say. And my reading of the executive order and the guidance with that is that that these sorts of police tactics are to be discouraged. At least that's what the governor wants. And it seems like from what Lieutenant and the chief have been discussing with us, that there's been a move to to disengage from these particular principles and to go to somewhere more progressive. One, Jim, is that safe to say? And two, if that is a fair assumption, how much of this change has been influenced by the certification process?
I don't like to say that this particular executive order was easy for us, but it's easier than I imagined because of the stuff that we have had in place recently. Going back through Lexapol, I sent everybody, that we use them, their management company, to go through our policies. So we have strict guidelines, and they look at the state and federal laws. And so we just aligned ours with what we had in place, went over every law that we had in policy. So for us, it really wasn't a big ask. And we do a pretty good job here at the PD for the most part of what we do with having 62 officers. And that's 62 different personalities and 62 different ways of handling calls. So I think we do a good job with that. So this wasn't a big ask, even though it is. We had things in place already.
Thank you. So there are some other bullet topics that the executive guidance suggested that we discuss. Jim, you touched on problem-oriented policing. Is there anything that you want to expand upon that? I mean, I think you did a pretty good job explaining how that works in Auburn, but that is the next item on the agenda that I have. So if there's anything that you want to add on that, or anyone else, maybe we should push on to that.
I'm all set with that. We can push on, and because some of the stuff I had told Nate before is interchangeable when we get into the community policing initiatives, the developing a plan with the citizens. It kind of goes with that problem-oriented policing. It's that community policing aspect. So we'll push on.
Okay, so Aileen, should we jump down to community policing initiatives then?
Sure, let's do that. Yep.
Well, I guess the big thing, I'm certain we would have unanimity in this group if we were asked what is the number one policing problem, societal problem in our city and county, and that's drugs. That is the heroin epidemic and the opioid epidemic. And I see that there's the second bullet there, diversion programs. I've represented the Q County District Attorney's Office in a drug court. I know that Officer in Charge Callett, if she's still on, I've served with her on those courts for a period of time. I've found them to be very rewarding and perhaps not a perfect solution, but a better solution than locking people up. But I guess that would be a good jumping off point on this. Like how can community policing initiatives interact with something like the opioid epidemic? How do they interact with that? Any thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, one of the things that we do is, we talked about this before, Nick's Ride and Helio. So the officers carry cards on them. If they do get somebody that has an addiction and has an issue, they will hand out the card. They will try to do that immediately there, because if it happens afterwards, the person is reluctant. Sometimes we get the families involved. If you get family members there, they'll help out and try to facilitate that with an addiction program. The other thing that we do, which I wouldn't imagine 23 years ago when I started this job, all of our officers are trained and carry Narcan. So we're out there on the street every day. We're the first responders. We get there a lot of times before the fire department. There's numerous cases where our officers have administered the naloxone to somebody and saved someone's life before the fire department was able to get there, or TLC. So we take what happens in the community and we try to react to it. And one of those things is issuing everybody and being trained in Narcan, how to use it.
Jim, do you track, if a patrol officer hands out a card for Nick's Ride or the Helio, is that tracked, when they come back after shift? Or is that something that is just kind of at the discretion of an officer and they have that tool on them, but it's not something that's recorded?
We don't record the number of cards they hand out, but if we do have an overdose case, the officer is required to send an email out and what they did with it. And a lot of times they'll put in that email that I spoke with the family member, we called Nick's Ride, we have somebody in contact with the family. But we don't track if somebody just happens to come across somebody that is having a bad day and is in need and hands a card out.
And can I just add to that regarding the narcotics and the police involvement and the Narcan and everything, on another level, they're deeply involved, whether it's Sean, a representative of the police department or whatever, on many of the community boards. So they're not only policing and responding to calls first and assisting at the scene, but they're deeply involved in planning how the community is going to be reactive to the problem. They're at events, everything like that. So I think that's great to build that bridge between the police and the community. And it's not just like, okay, we're the police and this is the protocol we're going to take when we respond to an overdose call. But they're part of that planning process as well within the community, which is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. The chief and the sheriff do an excellent job at being part of that. And it goes back to, it starts from the top down. How can you get officers to buy into something if you don't do it? If it doesn't happen administratively, it's hard for them to buy into the program.
Jim, I'm guessing that if an officer uses Narcan, that is something that is tracked and cataloged.
Yes, I have a state reporting system I have to do every quarter that I send it to New York State. And then we do one locally that every month I send one to the chief. If Narcan's been administered, we track who was trained, when we trained them, and that's all sent to the state.
So does the PD, because I know that now the law has changed where just lay people, citizens can have Narcan on them and administrate that. Does the PD do trainings for people to administer Narcan? No.
We haven't done them to the community. We do them within our department.
Okay.
We want to continue down, Nate, into that line of thinking with restorative justice programs. You guys can speak to that in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if there's a representative from the district attorney's office on other calls, and perhaps if there is, that person may have addressed this already. But as I mentioned, I was when I was at the DA's office, I was representative to the felony drug court. And that is essentially a diversion program that's people that would that were arrested and convicted for dealing drugs, selling drugs, were given an opportunity to go through treatment, and rather than be sentenced upon a felony to say prison. That's, again, it's certainly an imperfect tool, but I did experience people, the absolute depths of their journey as a human being, with the help of programming and support and peer support and a authority figure like a judge. I did see them, people turn their lives around. So in my mind, things like drug court or diversion, judicial diversion in that respect are positive. Lieutenant, I don't know if you can speak to, or if Officer in Charge Khaled is on here, if she could speak to a police officer's perspective on things like diversion programs and restorative justice, and perhaps how your perspective has changed from when you came on the job to now, if it has, because again, the old model, such as it was if you're convicted of a crime, you do the time, and this is a departure from that. So that's it takes a little getting used to, I think, and I'd be interested to know what, if you can speak to your own personal journey on that, if that is in fact the case, and what your average officer on the beat might think about things like drug court and diversion programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see I started calling her Detective Khaled, Chief Khaled now from Fort Barn, that left the meeting, but yeah, it's a hard sell. When I first was told we were going to get Narcan and administer Narcan, I'm like, I'm not EMS. I'm a police officer, and I had to change my tune because I was like, well, I got to the point and said, what if that was a family member of mine? I'd love to give them every opportunity to get the help they need, and realize that this isn't just a lot of other crimes they committed were not just committing the crimes. The drug was behind it, committing the crime. They needed to find the money. They needed to find everything they could do to get that fixed that particular day. So I had to change my mindset. And that is a hard sell to some officers. Some officers, especially you get out of the academy, we touched base on this before, is you're trained in the academy. You're a robot. You got to do things this way. It's officer safety. Don't do this. Bad guy does something wrong, lock them up. And now we have the diversion programs, and you arrest somebody Tuesday night and you lock them up and they get released on an appearance ticket. And then Wednesday afternoon, you're dealing with that same person, where that person used to be in jail for a little while. Now they're out before you finish the paperwork. So that's a hard sell to everybody. But when it does work, we need to remind them of the success stories that, hey, this can work. Somebody made it through their addiction and recovered, so it's constantly reminding the officers what they do. Some of them, it's the harder sell than others, especially the older people like me.
Reflecting on what we've talked about in terms of kind of all the initiatives and all of the issues that we deal with drugs in our community, you probably have lots of experience with, coming upon a scene where you have to use a lot of de-escalation just to get people to be responsive. And that's with drugs. But what about, also mental health? And then you have, other members of the community. I guess can you talk about the level of training or some of your experience or the policies around de-escalation, which is, a lot of what you do is de-escalation and trying to prevent more problems from occurring, but certainly the cards are stacked against us in that.
Right, and de-escalation being the term, it's to reduce the intensity of the confrontation at that time. But sometimes we have to increase that. If we're not getting people to comply because they're in the road and they won't get out of the street, and the potential that they're going to get injured by a car or something, we have to escalate it to get people to understand and get out of the street. So de-escalation, in a sense, is you can de-escalate after you raise that intensity, and then you get their attention, and then you can use the term de-escalate. For me, I've always been a talker. I've found that easy. Not every officer is that way. They want to A plus B equals C. Bad guy did something wrong, arrest bad guy, take him to jail. I've always treated somebody with respect and dignity, and I always felt like I got a lot more out of that. So for me, de-escalating was not a hard thing to do. I was able to talk to people and get them to talk to me, and that goes along with traffic stops. It goes along with arrests. You know, like I say, you'd have people thanking you after an arrest, and not in a million years would I think somebody would thank me after I arrested them. But everything that we do, like with mental health, you're asking that officer now to understand mental health, understand addiction, where before, you got to know if they're on drugs and are they mentally stable. So we ask a lot of our officers, and they got to change that hat and change that the way they think on a dime. And then you'll constantly hear on the radio, I need 2 officers to clear, I need 2 officers to clear. And then they're off to the next call. And they may be at a level where they just finished one call and then have to go to the other call. And now might be a child with a disability. And somebody, I'll use autism, for example. I was taught in the schools, talk soft, talk low, you can't raise your voice. And if you take an officer from that level to that next call, that can escalate just on the officer's presence and his voice. So we do the training. Some of that police one training we do, we send stuff out about people with disabilities, children with autism. De-escalation is a no-brainer. We do that all the time, and constantly talking to officers about when they get to the scene, taking charge and controlling that scene, but that doesn't always mean being at level 10.
This is Mayor Basile. How much information generally and how much time is given when an officer gets a call in the city to respond to a call to know what they're really getting into also? I mean, obviously the prep time from driving, and if the 911 operator that's passing the information on, I'm assuming that's where it's coming from. What kind of training between the 911 operators and what they're doing to assist the officers and where they're headed is there anything there that might help? I sometimes listen to the scanner, and by no means does that make me an expert, but I hear some numbers and that's it. And, that may mean something to the officers. I don't know how much though it means when they get a certain kind of call number. Or maybe we're not subject to getting to hear the rest of the conversation on a scanner.
No, you should get the communication, but the officer can ask for additional details. A lot of times the dispatcher 911 will put notes in the system. So when they look at their call, they will say, check the CAD notes before responding to the call. So they'll put specifics that they don't want to give over the air in the calls that the officer can look at. I mean, different than the county. In the city here, you might be 30 seconds from your next call. It's not like having to go from the middle of the city to Fairhaven or Sodus or somewhere, or the other end of the county where you've got a lot of time to mentally prepare. Sometimes we're at our calls within 30 seconds, our next call, because it's right around the corner. And trust me, when that radio goes off and you get that call with a subject with a gun or knife, your heart rate gets racing. And then you get there and it's not that. Now you got to bring yourself down to say, okay, that's not the threat. And now I got to communicate with the person, not at the level I was at on my way here, but down some levels.
what you described, Jim, sounds very stressful.
Gray hair.
Is are there any programs in place in terms of support for police officers that there's not a whole lot of other jobs that I can think of that ask someone to do what you've just described, right? Or or even the equivalent thereof, right? To go from a situation where you're dealing with an autistic child to a situation where there's just this weekend, right? There was a guy chasing a woman down the street with a butcher knife, right? That's tough. Like what sort of supports can a police department have and does the PD have to offer? I don't even know if counseling is the right word, but just mental health supports.
Well, we have a wellness program here that officers can go to, and that's a tough sell. And I'm going to have Josh chime in on this too after I'm done, but he's a great asset. But officers they've been reluctant in the past to go to that because you don't want to be known as the officer that can't handle the call.
Yeah.
If you can't handle this job, why'd you take the job in the first place? The trend is starting to change because officer suicides are on the rise. We actually have more officer suicides than in the line of duty deaths now, and which is a shame. And that is officers putting up that wall saying, I can't go to somebody. They're gonna think I'm weak. But we do have programs here, and a lot of times, just with myself over the years, the group of officers I was working with, we kind of talked it out. Hey, what did you think? What happened on that call? How did it affect you? And different things like that. Josh, you can chime in where he's a great asset to us in this realm.
Thanks, Lieutenant. I like to think I am. It is limited as a volunteer, limited availability to that, limited access, I should say. I try to make myself available. As he said, EAP, employee assistance, is it's a tough sell in general. To ask somebody to go see a counselor they don't know, they've never met. You're still always fighting a stigma with counseling for people who have never experienced that. So that's a challenge. But to his point, there is developing in law enforcement in general a focus on wellness, officer wellness and safety. And I think we're making some good strides there. I think there are some folks in the department here and in the sheriff's office who, through both crisis intervention team training and officer wellness training, are focused on the betterment of officers in general. Peer support is a growing area in law enforcement. I think we could probably see some development here with that. Certainly, what he referenced with early intervention, the early signs of issues that may be arising in officer calls, those are good tools to begin to intervene, right? So the benefit of my role is I can get a call from somebody who is struggling, and I don't have to report that out. It's not an incident it's not anything that I report to anybody. They can come freely to me, and Lieutenant Slayton or anybody, they're not asking me about a report of who I've spoken with and what I've spoken with them about. So there's a freedom there for them to do that. And that does happen on the officer end. And there's been a little bit of that as well on a supervisory end too, where they can reach out and say, hey, so-and-so had a rough call or had a rough experience or seems a little off, and they're able to look for support that way as well. And again, it's not something where I report out. If the supervisor needs a report, which has not happened, but if they need me to confirm that I've met with them, I simply let the officer know that and ask for permission to do that. But that hasn't even happened.
One of the other things that we looked at recently, Sergeant Gilfus was looking into, there's a company that does an app now. And you can go on and you can be as specific as you want to be or as general as you want to be, but it's someone to talk to, and you don't have to go see someone face to face, and they'll walk you through. Then if you do get to that point and you do need to meet with them, there's potential to do that. So we're looking into that.
this is Mayor Basile. That was good information to hear. They should be able to go without having to report. That might be part of the reluctancy is all these things we've talked about. We're tracking this and we're tracking that. If I thought I was being tracked because I was having some issues with a call and it was still bothering me, and repetitively, I might need more than one visit to talk to somebody. That's good to know that they have that option and that it's not a reported item of all the things we're reporting.
Yeah. The stickiest subject with law enforcement, I think, with mental health is the fact that they're carrying a firearm, right? So you have this element where no matter how you get around it, there's a concern with law enforcement that they go see a counselor, they say the wrong thing, and it's going to get reported out. They're going to lose their ability, and that's their career, that's their occupation, that's their livelihood, that's their family, that's everything. So I think that's there's a big resistance there to see mental health support from that perspective. And again, just with the natural stigma for people who haven't had that, or they didn't grow up in a family where it was a normal part of their family or anything. So I think those are real elements. Again, that's the benefit of a chaplain is, that's not something I'm not a mental health counselor, right? So I'm not having to report something or do an evaluation in that regard. So there is a freedom there. But I do encourage it. I just about any encounter that I I'm encouraging counseling because I see the value in it. But I appreciate, Mayor, your comment there, because it's important for them to have the freedom to speak to somebody, get the help they need without a fear of repercussion. Because when you attach repercussions to seeking help, it pushes, it quells that, right? It diminishes the amount of help people are going to seek out.
Anyone else have anything to add? I too am encouraged by the wellness program. And as an employer, we also utilize EAP for our staff. I know that is greatly utilized. It's a great place for people to go when they are dealing with things in their personal life that could be affecting them at work, not just, so things, as Jim is saying, people sometimes they'll feel like they can't handle the job. Well, it could be something that's just beyond the job that's just affecting them as a person. So, I'm happy to see that, and I'd be happy to know more about that as it grows too, because I think that, especially in this time of our society for police enforcement, police, officers, I think that's probably very necessary. It's kind of a mixed up time. Just in the past 10 years, I guess how I guess society is viewing police. I guess on the whole, it's it's definitely changed. So I think that, I'm sure there's a lot of anxieties for new people coming into it. And, it's a very difficult job. I can't imagine the stress. So that's great that I didn't realize you had so many things going on with that wellness program. Nate, do you think, is there any other topics under community policing, or do you want to move to violence prevention?
Yeah, let's move on to, unless there's anything else from the other members. A violence prevention is it's a one bullet segment, so it shows how much I know about it. So I'm really going to lean on Lieutenant Slayton here and anyone else that might have some ideas about that. But it is the last item, so I think we can safely move on. So Jim, would you care to shed some light on violence prevention?
Yeah, one of the topics is identifying where that's coming from and what group. We may have a youth group that's having a lot of violence and stuff like that. So we can work with other agencies. We've worked with BTW in the past with after-school programs, getting in and talking to the kids, making sure they have somewhere to go, making sure, like with the schools, we worked well with the social workers and the psychologist to identify. They would identify to us somebody that had an issue, or we would identify to them that somebody that we're having a constant problem with. Nate kind of goes along with that in-service training we just had. It's called the FAST training through Cuda Counseling. It's a Family Access to Services team. They came in and talked to us this past week about, somebody has an issue in a home. Somebody has a mental health issue, a violence issue in the home. We can send a quick note to them, and within 24 hours, they'll get back to that individual and that family and see what assistance they can be to them. That kind of alleviates some of the stuff on the officer, because sometimes we're that Band-Aid effect. We go there and we're being called to go to another call, and it's, you want to give them your full time, but yet that radio is going off and you have to go to the next call. So now we have services in place that we can say, hey, okay, when I get back to the office, I'm going to send this quick, fast form on to somebody else that can follow up, and they follow up within 24 hours. So that's, again, is reaching out to your community, saying, what resources do we have to alleviate some of the stuff that the police officers can do?
I guess this seems like the sort of thing that it's very it's not particularly data driven, right? It's more of interpersonal relationships that a police department connects with, like you said, with school social workers. How are you able to track this sort of thing? Is it something that you track, or is it just kind of part of what a police officer does and not something that gets counted?
That used to be the norm. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I had a message come across. That used to be the norm. You just did what you did on a daily basis and went about it. Now it's about, hey, what data do we have to show that we're using these other agencies and our resources that are out there? So now we can track that. Same thing. There's a handle with care that we're working with the school, in collaboration with the school. And that training is tomorrow morning here at the station. And it'll be a couple times. And what that does is, same thing. If the officers go to a call and they have an incident where a child's involved, they send an email to the SRO supervisor. SRO supervisor reaches out to the school. School district has a plan in place to reach out to the psychologists and social workers. And they might send a message out to the teachers to say, hey, Jim Slayton had a rough night last night. There was an incident. They don't get into the specifics. But if I'm in class and I'm not paying attention, or I happen to fall asleep, I might have been up all night because of something that happened. This now triggers the teacher to say, hey, I'm going to give this student a little bit of leeway. Hey, maybe you want to go down to the nurse and, maybe you need to lay down for a little while. It's all private. No one else needs to know what's going on, but enough people involved now do know. And that's that ever evolving training that we do. And that comes out tomorrow. I just happen to know enough about it that's what we're doing. And that's another thing that will help somebody along the way. Our SROs, and I hate to keep harping on it because I was an SRO for so long, but they're a vital part of this department, because when we were SROs, we checked the daily log every day to see what the officers did. If there was an arrest and you recognized the family name and you knew you had a student in the school, you either pull that student in and say, hey, do you need to talk to me about anything? Are you having an okay day? Do we need to go talk to your guidance counselor? And things like that. So our biggest thing is utilizing our resources that we have, whether it's in-house or outside, to help with people that have been victims of violence or witness violence. It's traumatic for people. It's traumatic for the children that have to live with this in their homes and don't know how to deal with it. So that aspect of us becoming social workers on some calls helps. But let's get it in the hands of somebody that can follow up rather than us just trying to do it in the 10 minutes to the hour that we're there.
Is there any analog to the mentally ill population? You know, there's not, obviously there, mentally ill adults are not in school, and there's just not the same sort of support for that population. But you know, they're certainly a group that has issues with violence, and you know, either as victims or as people that are unable to control their impulses and engage in violent behavior. Is there anything similar that the police department can do with the mentally ill population that we have in the city?
Yeah, we work with the mobile crisis team, and unfortunately, their hours aren't expanded 24 hours a day. We can utilize them at a certain period of time up to midnight. And the officers love this because it's another avenue for them to be able to handle a call and call the expert in to spend the time with the individual that they need. So we'll call mobile crisis, and they'll come out to the scene where we're at. And as long as the person isn't violent and they need that mental health aspect of it, they'll work with them, and they'll take care. If they need to go to the hospital, we'll get them to the hospital, and mobile crisis will sit there. Also, when we dealt with that FAST, that family access to services, they advised us that there's Officer Andy Callett came up with a great thing. He said, after midnight, that's the problem we run into. From midnight to 8 in the morning, there aren't a lot of services available. And with this FAST, the counselor advised us that there's a mobile app. If we give that person's name, they'll reach them out to the next day. And there's a mobile app that these people can go to if they just need that reassurance that everything's okay. You don't really need to call the police. We can work through this. We can help you with that. And that's now something that we will be able to utilize. And that's what that FAST program will do. And maybe the officers won't have to go there time and time again, that it can be handled through the professional services.
Great. So who is on the mobile crisis team, Lieutenant? Is it someone from the APS? Is it who makes up that when you call in? Who comes to the scene?
They have a staff. We have a list at the desk that they can. There's an 800 number we contact, or a number we contact, and they send out who's available that are certified in mental health.
Okay.
That's a contracted service, correct?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And some of the things that we can do now with mental health that are actually through county mental health has opened their doors, where if we have somebody in crisis during the daytime hours, instead of having to take them to the emergency room, and sometimes you had to sit up there for hours and do that, we can take them right to mental health now, and they will get them in there with their counselor. So we continued to grow, and over the years have evolved in getting people the help that they need.
Well, Aileen, I think we've been at it for about an hour and a half. That's probably what we spent on the topic last week, and we thought we didn't have enough time last week, and apparently an hour and a half is the perfect amount of time. So I guess I would suggest that if there's anything else out there, from the floor, let's please talk about it. But otherwise, we can start wrapping this up. I'll say that there's, again, there's going to be 2 community forums where when our group and the 2 other groups input gets finalized and formalized a little bit and put into a document that's for public consumption. And then that is, everyone on this call is welcome to attend those community presentations, but certainly that's not a requirement that we would ask of you. And I'll get out more specifics as to likely it's going to be a Zoom appearance as well. So we'll button up the details on that. And I guess unless there's anything else from anyone, I'll just say thank you to everyone for your input on this. Again, I think this has been a very valuable and interesting process.
Thank you, Nate.
Yep, I appreciate your time and whoever put this together. This is Mayor Basile. I do want to have one comment that there was something said earlier. I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston, so I got the talk as well as the rest of my family members as we were getting our driver's license and heading out about how to conduct ourselves if we get pulled over by the police. For me, maybe it's my age. I don't know. I don't see it as a black and white issue. It's something that when you live in the city, you get the talk. And it was just a matter of a respect thing. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yes, sir. I have that same conversation with my children. I'm in law enforcement and I have 2 daughters, and I made sure that they understood if you get pulled over and stopped, this is what you're to do. So I have that same conversation in my household. Laura, you're on mute.
Yeah, it popped up that, hey, are you trying to talk? So this is just a question about the SRO. So now with the schools closing again tomorrow, what type of role do they play? Or is there any role for them with the 100% virtual learning? So I guess my thought process through this whole entire thing with running Head Start and everything, like who's doing those wellness checks? Like you referenced the correlation between an arrest and the effects that it has on a family and everything. Do the SRO officers have any role still by their virtual if a parent's arrested or if there was a domestic situation in the home the night prior? Is there any contact with that child or children?
We had that discussion today. And the plan is the SROs are going to continue their role with the school. So what they do now is they go out and they do home visits with a social worker from the school or a psychologist. And they've actually been going out, and the people that had issues with getting on the Chromebooks, going with the principal and trying to educate the parents on how to get on the Chromebook and working through any avenue that they can to help them succeed and get their education. So they're going to continue that. They're going to continue that role.
And that's great. And I mean, I always talk about the bridge between the police and the community, because I feel that at times it's disjointed and it may be familial, cyclical, whatever it is, that there's the lack of respect for police. And like Mayor Basile was saying, I mean, I got the talk. And you respect the police, whether or not you agree with them, you respect them. They have a vital role in the community and so forth. But with that connection with the SROs and with the police, I feel it's vital because the night prior, there may have been a domestic, the child may have observed something that in a normal situation would have turned them off from the police, or the police are the bad guys. They took dad away or they took mom away. But then with the officer going to the home the next day or checking in on them at school, it's the opportunity to reverse that image that child has of creating a negative outlook toward the police. So personally, I just think that's crucial. That's a service that the Auburn Police Department is able to have and is continuing to do so even when schools are 100% virtual again.
Yeah, and we did that with our domestic violence follow-up team. And
Mhm.
that's what they did. The victim may not want to say something at the particular time in fear of retribution from the husband or whatever.
Right.
We go out afterwards and say, okay, he's not there. Maybe there's an order of protection now. We know he's not going to be there. Well, at least he should not be. If he is, he can be charged with it. But if he's not there, now it's just you and I. Is there something you want to say? Do you, if at the time you didn't want to reach out to domestic violence services, now maybe you do. And now we give them another form and we have them make contact with domestic violence. So follow-up's huge. But the officers on the road, that's the problem, is they don't have that follow-up time a lot. It's that extra stuff. It's the SROs. It's a domestic violence program, which came through grants that allow us to do that.
Our community's lucky that we have those.
Any other topics or questions, comments? Well, thank you. As Nate pointed out, December 15th is our first public forum, and please look for the information on that. We'll do an overview and subcommittee reports, and January 5th is the second final forum for the public. So this has been a great process so far. I appreciate all of the honesty and the feedback and the questions. And I look forward to bringing this to a broader audience in the coming weeks. So thank you, guys. I appreciate all your input.
This is Mayor Basile. Before we get off, on the 15th, is that in the evening, the public outreach? I'm just trying to figure out my work schedule and.
Jim can let us know.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that it is, Mayor.
Okay, good.
It's the idea is that it is. We're meeting at 3 because we're largely, professionals. That this, in one way or another, this is our job to be concerned about this movement. But I think we're planning the outreach piece of it to be for public consumption. The former mayor of Auburn is going to be the MC for both events, and he's I think a very talented person when it comes to presenting this sort of thing forward facing, and he also has the chops of being the mayor of the city for a while. So Jim, I don't know if you have, or Aileen, if you have the details, but I know it was certainly planned to be pushed out for public consumption at a time after business hours.
That's my belief.
Yeah, I don't have the time right here in front of me, but that was definitely talked about. So we'll send that out to you. Okay. With that, I thank you again. Please stay safe and healthy through this time. Of course, we're all experiencing the surge here in our county. In the next kind of 7 days, we'll decide, I guess, the future of our region, if we're going to do any sort of widespread closure. So please keep yourself safe and healthy and your family safe and healthy.
Thank you too.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.